Story time. First time DM discovers player cheating. Player rage quits after DM tweaks encounters. Part 1 ud af 3.
Nej.
Den er lidt
DM Weeks Encounters.
Okay. Spoiler alert, Lost Miner Van Delver. Så det spiller vi ikke.
Nej, jeg tror vi er...
Okay.
Jeg tror vi er noget over det niveau.
Got into the hobby a few years ago. No IRL friends, so I used Roll20 and looking for groups to find games. Had several rough experiences as a player that should be posted on RPG Horror Stories. Ultimately decided to DM the 5th edition starter set for a group of randos. Myself. Okay. Posted looking for group with only requirement that players have neither read nor played through the starter set. Which is, fair. Game starts off well enough. Everyone gets along. No one has played the starter set. Players are all new to the game, and character creation goes well. The group consists of me, the DM, a 2-pack of friends who knew each other, IRL, Adam and Barry, who played the rogue and druid respectively, Deb, who's an awkward Canadian female monk, and the cheater, Chris, who rolls a variant human paladin with polar master feat at level 1. Uh-oh! You know what that means?
Ding.
But
Det er bare sådan noget...
you hear the words variant human and you know. Early on, it's clear Chris is trying to break the game. Instead of following the trail of goblin tracks to rescue their NPC employer, he pushes for them to go to town first. Doesn't take no for an answer, so the party continues to town to deliver the cart of goods. Town is beset by brigands, and NPCs express concern since the employer was supposed to arrive in town a day ahead of the party. I'm trying to push them back on track without railroading them, but Chris wants to fight brigands instead. Encounter with bad guys goes as expected for the level 1 party. All but Chris get dropped by multi-attacks. Had planned that they get captured should TPK occur, but Chris uses Polearm Master plus Blast to one-shot the remaining baddies. Group recovers and decide they should go back and try to find the employer. Campaign proceeds, but I start to notice that Chris seems to know exactly what checks to make to avoid all traps. He knows a shortcut to the boss, etc. He plays it off like they're lucky guesses, but his lucky guesses begin to border on clairvoyance. A couple weeks pass, and Adam and Barry complain to me that the game feels like the Chris show. I talk to Chris and ask that he can be conscious of how he's playing to allow others to do their thing sometimes. He apologizes to the group in the next session and passive-aggressively states how he'll play his character less optimally so other players can have their fun. Prick. Everyone else at the table starts having a lot of fun. Except whenever the players are about to execute a plan that may trigger an ambush or a trap or be slightly less than a perfect playthrough, Chris would be like, "Are you sure you want to do that?" It's at this point that Chris's clairvoyance get passed on to Deb, and also at this point where it's revealed that Chris and Deb are now an item both in and out of game.
What?
At one point, Deb asks to look for secret doors and to avoid metagaming. After failed checks, I roll behind the screen. I tell her that while her search is thorough, it's just a normal wall. Now this spot happens to be exactly where the leader of the hideout's secret escape route leads. Chris decides to leave a bear trap and some ball bearings there anyway. I start to suspect that Chris has read or is reading the published module to get ahead. To confirm my suspicions, I decide to tweak encounters. The game becomes a lot of work to prep, but it's fun to watch Chris get increasingly frustrated as he expends resources to avoid things that aren't there and gets surprised by new stuff.
Ja, tak.
Lige præcis. This gets us to an encounter with a banshee. Oh shit. In the published module, the encounter is purely roleplay to avoid a TPK at level 3 with her whale. They have to flatter her to convince her to share information that they need. I tweaked it so that they had to wait for the banshee to show up with a trap in the form of bejeweled jewelry case, which is locked. Chris seems confused by the setup, keeps saying she should be here though. Adam the rogue decides the temptation is too great and tries to pick the lock in the case. Success. Everyone cheers. He opens it to reveal that it was a music box with the effect of her wail inside, but only Adam can hear it. Adam fails and drops to 0. She shows up pissed. They're extremely unlikely to get the info they need from her now. Adam is dying, so we do roll initiative to follow a turn order during this mostly roleplay encounter. I explain to the party that she doesn't seem to want a fight and seems embarrassed of her own appearance. I suggest that someone should stabilize Adam while the others can attempt to convince her to get the information. Chris is pissed and keeps saying, quote, "This isn't how it goes," over and over. I know for sure now that he's been reading the module. His turn, I remind him that Adam needs healing and they're still there to convince her to give them info. Instead, he finally quits trying to play everything optimally and just tries to smite her.
Yes!
Everyone else playing groans at his decision. With his polearm master, smite, and some inspiration, he comes close to one-shotting the Banshee at level 3. The Banshee wails for real this time. No one saves. I have them roll death saves, which they all make, so they're just unconscious as a party in the Banshee's den. The Banshee retreated in shame at her own wretched existence. Chris is livid. He goes off about how overpowered Banshees are and how that's why the writers of the module made it so she wouldn't use her wail. I said, how would you even know that without cheating? He disconnects right there. Sends me a message over Discord admitting that he'd read the adventure module, but that the game just isn't for him, and resigns. I wish I could say that this is where it ended, but 2 weeks later, Deb begged me to let him come back to apologize and keep playing. We were also having trouble finding a 4th player, and Adam and Bear just wanted to keep the game going, so the saga continued.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Part 2. So, Chris the Cheater comes back to the game, partially because Deb begs me and partially because we were having a hard time finding a 4th to play with us. I was desperate not to let my campaign fail, and I foolishly thought letting him back was the best option. Chris assured the group that he was no longer reading ahead and could only vaguely remember details of what was to come. I decided not to take his word for it and continued to tweak things. Sometimes by just a little bit, but more often by a lot. One of the reasons I ran the module was because I didn't have a ton of time to prep in my life. Countering his cheating meant more time prepping, and DMing was gradually becoming more of a burden. But at the same time, I was really enjoying the creative outlet. The campaign continues. Chris is more careful, letting himself fail at things occasionally. But whenever it really matters, he always miraculously knows exactly what's going to happen next. The roleplay between Chris and Deb is getting weird too, but mostly just awkward and not inappropriate yet. That's part 3. Adam and Barry are bros and doing a great job keeping things light and fun while improving their role-playing skills a lot. The group had finally saved their employer and triumphantly made it back to town. It seemed all that was left was taking on the lost mine itself and the mysterious villain of the campaign, the Black Spider. In the first part, I mentioned how Chris pushed the party in the first session to go to Vandalen rather than follow the clear clues of the goblin kidnapping. When it came out that he cheated, Chris sort of bragged one session that he had tried that because when he read ahead, he thought the goblin cave was boring and wanted to see if he could skip it. The fuck? This is where I made the biggest tweak to my adventure. When they got their NPC employer back to town, they were all met with distrust and derision rather than a hero's welcome. See, I had decided that as a consequence of Chris's fuckery at the beginning of the campaign, that the real Sildar had been killed due to their delay, and one of the Black Spider's doppelgangers took his place with the goal of 1. Investigating whether the player's employer had told anyone else the location of the mine, and 2. Consolidating the spider's hold on Vandalen by taking over as Sildar. This included poisoning the town against the adventurers while they were out adventuring. Thus, they were met by an antagonistic new townmaster in Sildar, backed up by a militia that was a mix of former Red Brands and local townsfolk. The next couple sessions, Chris was extraordinarily silent at the table. It was as if he utterly lacked all creativity now that we were completely off book. All he could suggest was murder hoboing his way through. When that didn't work, he tried to bully the group into leaving town straight for the mine, despite Gundren himself saying this was more important. I don't know who this is, but it's someone from the module, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
The other three didn't bite. They investigated Sildren and learned he was a fake. Sildren, whatever. They made a deal with the Shents to run the remaining red brands out of town, which meant the Shents gained partial control of the town. They won the favor of the town by exposing Sildren as a fake. The session climaxed with fake Sildar taking a halfling kid NPC hostage and fleeing to a cave with a passage to the Underdark. Chris is bitching throughout, mostly because he wasted his smite slaying some mooks, and I wouldn't give them a long rest because they had to save the kid. But there was once where he says, quote, "This isn't right." The showdown with fake Sildar was rad. At first, fake Sildar pretended to be the kid, and they couldn't tell which was real. Barry the Druid used his last spell slot on Moonbeam. Desperate, the fake Sildar grappled the kid and threatened to throw him into a seemingly bottomless pit if they didn't let him go. It's Chris's turn. He starts crying. Like really ugly, fully grown-ass man crying. Awkward. He is so upset, yet totally paralyzed about what to do. He passes his turn. The party eventually decides to let the guy go to save the kid. Session over. Adam and Barry are raving about how much fun the session was. Deb is hyped too. That's when Chris goes off about how he feels like I'm fucking with him now because he cheated way back when. He tells the group that the session triggered his anxiety because he didn't know what was going to happen next and begged me and the group to let the game get back on track. I was pretty shitty to him in response, calling him a bitch and suggested he should just quit the game if it stressed him out that much. He disconnected. This was followed by a letter to the group about how hurt he was by my singling him out and changing the module and telling a whole long sob story about his life and how D&D is one of his few escapes and he needs it to feel in control over his shitty life. I was ready to write him off then and there.
Man.
Yeah, I know, right?
I mean, that's that.
But that's being a spoiled brat is what it is. Like, you do not get how this game works. Anyway, I was ready to write him off then and there, but no one wanted to play without him, and I was still too much of a pushover at that point in my life to not cut it off. So I let him come back, which is what led to part 3, where the game finally came tumbling down. Part 3. And I haven't actually read this part yet, so this is gonna be fun. So this poster spoils for 5th edition starter set and a little bit for Storm King's Thunder. Chris rejoins after his sub-story and at the behest of the other players who just wanted to play D&D. All that's left is the secret mine that constitutes the finale. The party spent the first session preparing for the trip, and this is where I encounter the first red flag and the first signs that Chris didn't give a fuck and felt like his cheating was now condoned. As part of the prep, Chris makes a point of buying... As part of the prep, Chris makes a point of buying holy water. Why can I not say that? Quote, "Because you never know when you might need this." End quote. Yes, you do, Chris. You know exactly what that's for. It was at this point that Chris and Deb's characters hook up in game. At the beginning of the campaign, I had said that I didn't want to play through explicit sexual stuff, and everyone agreed. But now they were role-playing their characters, admitting their love for each other, then started awkwardly narrating the resulting public displays of affection. Chris says, quote, "I take her to our room in the inn and remove her monked robes." I cut it off and said, "Let's cut to black here. Your character shared a room at the inn, and we can leave the rest to the imagination." Chris is miffed, as is Deb. Adam and Barry both remind them of what we all agreed on in session 0. I run the mine pretty much by the book because I didn't have a whole lot of free time to prep, and because Storm King's Thunder just came out and I had plans to transition from Lost Mine to that module while pretending like I was homebrewing. I figured the adventure would be too new for Chris to cheat with, and was an open enough sandbox to make his cheating not really matter anyway. In the mine, it becomes the Deb and Chris show. They both know exactly when and where enemies are, where to look for loot, etc. Adam and Barry are getting frustrated. They end up having to take a long rest in the mine. The party locks down a room with some pythons wedged under the doors. Good idea, Barry. On Chris's watch, he decides he wants to narrate, quote, slipping into Deb's bedroll. I tell him no. He keeps going. I throw a roaming pack of ghouls at them who barge through the door. Chris is mad because, quote, presumably Deb's passive perception should have been high enough to have heard them coming. Not when she's occupied with you just trying to slip it in, dude. At the end of the day, with no resources, it's a tough fight and Deb goes down and fails 2 death saves before they can help. The couple is mad because I'd interrupted virtual tabletop sexy times. Barry is mad because his really good idea of locking down the room didn't work. The only other highlight from the mine was the flame skull. Remember the holy water Chris bought? It was for this. It was a tough fight and Chris wanted to avoid it altogether, but Adam and Barry would sometimes face roll a room just to fuck with Chris. They made it through then. Then Chris dumped the holy water on the flame skull's remains. Quote, just in case. My eyes rolled out of my head at that point, but I was just going to bear it until Storm King's Thunder. The starter set ends. They get some downtime. Squad is level 5, so we're starting chapter 3 of Storm King's Thunder. Storm King's Thunder has 3 ways to run at the initial call to action encounter. Each one puts the players in a different town on the Sword Coast, and the encounters are very different. I don't tell them we're running the module, I just give them a quest to get their asses up to a city in the north called Bryn Shander. I'm prepping the Bryn Shander encounter, and see Chris and Deb are logged into the game in Roll20. They keep making rolls while I'm trying to prep, so I jump into the Discord to ask them to clear out for a bit to see if they need or to see if they need help with something. They were acting out the scenes I would let them have, didn't notice me enter the chat, so I had to clear my throat and they both just disconnected. I sent them both a message that whatever they do on their own time is whatever, but that they needed to use a personal voice chat for that. No response. The party makes their way to Bryn Shander. With random encounters, Chris doesn't have much to work with, but he was damn sure to know exactly what each enemy's weaknesses were, as well as their HP. Second guessing my math when he'd expected the enemy to be, quote, bloodied. The encounter in Bryn Shander consists of a massive ice giant attack. The players take control of NPCs around town in addition to their characters. If the NPCs survive, they will be rewarded with a quest from that NPC. The group had met some of these NPCs already, but this encounter was how I was introducing others to the party. I drew a giant non-contiguous map of sections of the town to scale down the 3 or 4 separate encounters across the city and gave NPC stat blocks to each player. Chris insisted on a particular NPC, which was a red flag that maybe I hadn't been crafty enough pretending like I was homebrewing. Like he really wanted that NPC's quest in particular. I don't even remember what it was, but at the time it stood out as an indication that my attempt to shake his cheating had failed. Either way, battle ensues and Chris is trying to keep his NPC out of danger, but the encounters were set up to be dangerous. A giant boulder hit NPC Chris and he goes down. No one around has healing, and all the medicine checks to stabilize fail. Adam's NPC dies too, but they win the battle and drive off the giants. Chris is clearly upset that his NPC died. Tries to argue that he should be able to bring the NPC back, etc. I tell him them's the breaks, no resurrection, no retcons. He then has the balls to complain about my choice of town for the first attack. He had apparently read the new adventure module and was hoping I would take them to one of the other towns to start the module instead. Specifically, Tribor, because it was more interesting. I called him a piece of shit cheater and asked that he leave the game. He says he quits because I wouldn't give him enough role-playing time with Deb. He and Deb disconnect. Chris left me a message the next day cataloging all his beef with my DM style and how I needed to find a new hobby. Adam and Barry aren't mad at the cheating because, quote, after all, even with the cheating, we almost died a bunch of times. They still resigned from the game because they didn't feel like finding 2 new players and wanted it to end at the end of the starter set in the first place. So just like that, the game fizzled out. The story does have a happy ending. I took about a year off of DMing after that, then found a new group to DM through Tomb of Annihilation. We played every week for a year straight and they got through the whole thing. It was epic and fun and super rewarding. Fuck you, Chris. That's that. Oh, quote, top comment. Chris is a douchemonger.
Douchemonger?
Douchemonger.
Why do you cheat in a tabletop RPG? I don't get it. What the fuck? Why do you play?
It's just a game.
It's not even just a game. It's a game that, like, win lose. That's not what the game is about. it's about having fun. There's no way to, like, you know, like power. If you power game and like, then clearly you don't get the point.
Yeah.
Unless you're playing the game specifically because you like want to do like full on power fantasy. But in that case, go for a super broken build or something.
Ja, og bare sådan,
Instead of just going like, yeah, I'm gonna read ahead and see what's gonna happen and just be clairvoyant, because that's my version
han
of fun.
gik jo også for et godt build oven i det.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, on top of that, he also did that, right? But I mean, if he just went for a power build, that would be fine, I think. It just, I really do not understand the fucking logic to say, hell yeah, it'll be fun if I just actually predict everything that's going to happen.